pollinators, wildlife, and all of humanity can thrive. So without further ado, I'll pass it off to Terry Tempest Williams.
Thank you so much, Allie, for your work and for the work of Oregon Wild. I love your state, and to our friends in Oregon, hello. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And it means so much to both Allen and me, knowing what you do for wildlands, wildlives, and water. I'm just going to take maybe 10 to 15 minutes and read from the introduction, A Wild Promise. And just to say how much I have loved working with Allen Crawford. He's one of the great conservationists. You'll meet him in just a few moments, but it was such a privilege and remains so to work with him on this book. And I'm so inspired. And just on the screen, you can see the Utah prairie dog and the sage grouse, two of the most powerful individuals in the American West right now. On the 50th anniversary of the Endangered Species Act, I'm thinking about extinction and what that means for a creature, a living being, to vanish from existence. Say their names: great auk, passenger pigeon, Carolina parakeet, Steller sea cow, Caribbean monk seal, Great Plains wolf, Puerto Rican long-nosed bat, Maryland darter, Utah lake sculpin, Labrador duck, heath hen, Bachman's warbler, Circe's blue butterfly, Wyoming toad, and Panamanian golden frog, all extinct beginning in the 1880s to present. Imagine an individual animal or insect or plant, alone, reaching, wandering, wondering if they are the last of the living members of their kind. Certainly they must know, sense, or fear this fact. What must it be like to surrender to one's isolation by way of a howl, or cry, or flight, or bloom, to attract a response, a glimmer or glint of kin? The sixth extinction is upon us. It is true, species extinction has been a natural part of the Earth's evolutionary history, as evidenced with the disappearance of the dinosaurs in the Cretaceous era, 65 million years ago, to the extinctions of the great megafauna, such as mammoths and mastodons in the late Pleistocene, who inhabited the last ice age some 10,000 years ago. But scientists today report an accelerated loss of biodiversity, 1,000 times faster than the natural rate of approximately 1 to 5 species annually. Now, on the brink of extinction in North America are red wolf, wood bison, grizzly bear, black-footed ferret, California condor, ocelot, Florida manatee, northern fur seal, loggerhead turtle, green sea turtle, giant sea bass, Oregon spotted frog, Oahu tree snail, rusty-patched bumblebee, Hines emerald dragonfly, Kirtland warbler, Eskimo curlew, wood stork, willow flycatcher, North Atlantic right whale, beluga whale, and elkhorn coral. Say their names, remember their names. Loneliness inhabits my body as I whisper the names of the extinct and endangered, something better to do in a circle as ceremony, as we pay our respects and contemplate their lives together. How are we to survive without our companion species on planet Earth? We are not above them or below them, but side by side, fellow creatures, caught in a web of uncertainty in this era of the Anthropocene, where our human footprint lands heavy on the Earth. Grief is part of extinction, that when understood and witnessed becomes an emotion that parallels love. When the last rabbs-fringed limbed tree frog died in the care of the Atlanta Botanical Gardens on September 26, 2016, I wept. I had visited the Atlantic Botanical Gardens that year and knew the single remaining member of this species, tenderly named Tuffy, was holding on. His call penetrated the walls of the gardens, but there was never a call back in response. He was an endling. Today, Over 1,400 species appear on the endangered species list under the jurisdiction of the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, all part of the Endangered Species Act signed into law on December 28, 1973 by President Richard M. Nixon. I'm just going to share now one story and then finish. As a child, I watched the men I loved in my family lift their high-powered rifles and shoot one prairie dog after another and another and another for fun, and then walk away. They called them pop guts. On the way back to our camp, I remember stepping over their small, blood-soaked, blown-apart bodies, left in the matted grasses of their prairie dog town. And then a single prairie dog raised her head out of a burrow and stood up and faced me. I froze. I froze in place, unable to avoid her gaze. She then disappeared underground. And on that day, I made a vow, short of standing in front of my father's rifle, that I would be their ally. I've tried to keep that vow. In 2000, in a special millennial issue of the New York Times Magazine, the Utah prairie dog was featured as one of the 10 species most likely to become extinct by the next millennium. Their fate was to become a ghost species. I wrote a book on prairie dogs, and every month I can tell you, I send a picture of prairie dogs in different poses, one with a helmet and bazooka, to friends at the Utah Nature Conservancy, a playful nudge for protection. Did any of these gestures make a difference? It made a difference to me. This was just another gesture, part of my wild promise that became a vow I made to a lone Utah prairie dog who survived my family's massacre. I have to tell you, I remember in 1977, I lobbied the Utah legislature as a graduate student in education from the University of Utah. I'd created a Utah prairie dog curriculum for the Salt Lake City School District. At the state capitol, I was met with incredulity and disdain by representatives who insisted on calling prairie dogs varmints. At that time, there was barely over 3,300 prairie dogs left. The Speaker of the House handed me a recipe for prairie dog stew. Finally, in 1984, the Utah prairie dog was added to the Fish and Wildlife's endangered species list and remains on the red list of threatened species today. So when that happened in the New York Times Magazine in the year 2000, I remember the sorrow that I was feeling. I often return to these lines from the prose poem Dead Seal near McClure's Beach, written by Robert Bly. Perhaps you know it. The poem made me care. His words about a seal dying from spilled oil held a mirror up to my own complicity in the suffering of animals. Quote, "Goodbye, brother. Die in the sound of waves. Forgive us if we have killed you. Long live your race, your inner tube race, so uncomfortable on land, so comfortable in the ocean. Be comfortable in death then, when the sand will be out of your nostrils and you can swim in long loops through the pure death, ducking under as assassinations break above you. You don't want to be touched by me. I climb the cliff and go home the other way." How do we live and love with a broken heart? And how do we cultivate a strength not to look away? We can write a different ending to the stories of critically endangered species and all the miraculous species, large and small, whose populations are in decline. Their lives are in our hands. Wild mercy is in our hands. A new ending is possible once we begin to love and live differently. Allen?
Thank you, Terry. It gets me in the gut every time. I've heard it, you've read that multiple times and it still puts a lump in my throat. Thank you. And I'd like to publicly thank Terry. This book would not have been published without her moral authority and her eloquence. So thank you, Terry. Let me see if I can get my, there we go. I guess how's that? Can you see it scroll this time, Terry?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you, Allie. Okay, So I also prepared something, I can't really, and I wouldn't impinge on what Terry has just painted for us, the larger picture. So I'm going to concentrate on the project itself and the nuts and bolts and the history of it. So if you forgive me if I sound a bit wooden, it's because I want to make sure that that I get as much into the time frame as possible. So I also want to make sure that everyone is provided with enough of a background to enhance their appreciation of A Wild Promise and its mission. I should begin by saying that I'm not a scientist or a policy expert. I'm just a grunt. For 20 years, I've been a rank and file conservation volunteer for groups focused on the New Jersey Pine Barrens. For decades, I've helped clean up dump sites, corralled oil-covered geese, counted bat colonies, maintained hiking trails, rescued animals, managed beaver dams, reported poachers, established and surveyed rare plant populations, got dozens of turtles safely across local roads, monitored rattlesnake nurseries, and helped New Jersey State Park Service build blockades to keep illegal off-roading out of sensitive areas that are necessary for the survival of increasingly rare species of snakes, turtles, frogs, orchids, and carnivorous plants. This book goes deeper with me than the 3 years I spent working on it. In reality, it took me a lifetime to make this book. Countless versions of this book have been floating around in my head for as long as I can remember. At its core, making this book was a devotional project, much like an illuminated manuscript. The images and hand-rendered type have more in common with icons than likenesses. The final form of A Wild Promise began with me noodling around with a popular drawing app called Procreate. I'm sure some of you are familiar with it. I was amazed by how dramatically Procreate's intuitive direct interface sped up my drawing process. This was the production tool I was waiting for. It would have taken me a decade to create this book otherwise. For years, Tin House has been kind enough to keep an open door for me. So in early 2020, just before COVID hit, I sent Tin House some prints of the artwork I'd been making on Procreate and proposed an illustrated book on an extinct species. During the phone meeting with Tin House, I was told by the editors that the 50th anniversary of the Endangered Species Act was coming up in late 2023. This immediately became the obvious direction of the book. The final title, A Wild Promise, was also decided during the same initial meeting. This December 28th marks the 50th anniversary of the Endangered Species Act. With its 100 full-color illustrations, A Wild Promise not only commemorates this landmark act, but celebrates its many successes. A Wild Promise not only features the Endangered Species Act's most famous triumphs, like the bald eagle and American alligator. This book also features newly listed species. But most important, it also features lesser-known species currently poised on the brink of extinction, like the Texas blind salamander, the devil's hole pupfish, and the Tolotoma snail, all of which would have almost surely perished were it not for the ESA. A few of the species in this book live in a single location no larger than a rug. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Online Database was an invaluable resource for compiling a final list of species to include in the book. Hundreds of data points, binomials, range, listing status, population counts, needed to be collected, fact-checked, and edited as I charged from one page to the next. The average turnaround for each page was 3 days, starting with research, then sketching out the type and image for the page, then drawing the final artwork. A few pages took considerably longer, such as the peregrine falcon and the American alligator. The generous dimensions of the book demanded the images be as detailed as I could possibly make them, and I spared no effort in that endeavor. Because of all of us, young and old alike, owe so much to the Endangered Species Act, it was important to me that A Wild Promise gain a wide readership. I've seen young readers enjoy it as a fun, educational picture book, and I've seen adult readers appreciate Terry's moving essay the bold imagery, and the book's mission. Regarding the book's mission, I've been informed by Tin House that copies of A Wild Promise have been placed into the hands of several U.S. senators. My hope is that this book will help strengthen the case for the continued support of the Endangered Species Act and to call attention to the plight of many lesser-known threatened and endangered species that deserve our support and advocacy. I'd like to publicly thank Terry for being such a tireless champion of the book's mission, and my friends and colleagues at Tin House for believing in this book. And my sincere thanks to Oregon Wild for hosting us today, and to all of you for your time and your goodwill. Thank you. So I'll take it, you can take it from here, Allie, if you like. I've said my piece.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alan. So now I can go into some Q&A, and please feel free to add some more to the chat as well. And this is for either Terry or Alan, and I can also jump in as well here. So the first question is, do you think the Endangered Species Act will see another 40 years, or is it possible that it will no longer be active in policy?
Terry, you want to take this one?
I can take that. I feel very hopeful that it will remain. I think it is a robust, eloquent, elegant, and effective piece of legislation that has survived very hostile administrations in the past, such as the Trump administration before that, the Bush-Cheney regime, and I think it will continue. I think it will continue because it's the right thing to do. And I was with you, Allie, at the 50th anniversary celebration in Washington, D.C. in September. And I think when we heard the kind of powerful speeches from Debbie Dingell, whose husband, John Dingell, was one of the original thought leaders and representatives and authors of the Endangered Species Act, you can see that generational passion continue. The same with Senator Cory Booker and with Representative Grijalva. It was so inspiring. I also feel it's going to survive because I remember the 40th anniversary. And there I would say well over half, 60, 70% were people, largely white people, over 50. This time, as Allie can attest, I would say well over half were under 40. And it was a diverse group of people with tribal elders there, Black and brown people. It was just a very different community that was inclusive and goes deep. So I feel very powerful about the longevity of the endangered species. That doesn't mean we're not going to have to join forces and the kind of work that Oregon Wild does. So I do feel that more than even the Endangered Species Act, we're seeing that wilderness, biodiversity, and threatened and endangered species are all part of the umbrella of inclusivity, not just for our species, but all species. So I think we're changing.
Thank you, Terry. I definitely agree with that. And just to add a little bit, the Endangered Species Act has been 99% effective at preventing the extinction of listed species. And a lot of people say that people who maybe don't like the act say, well, there are still species that haven't recovered. But if you think about it, it's more of a long game. There has been a lot of time in which these species have slid towards the brink of extinction. So it will take time to recover them, but that doesn't mean that the Endangered Species Act isn't working. It's very effective, and it was actually passed bipartisan by the Nixon administration. So I think I definitely agree with what Terry said. I think it's has potential to be very long lasting just because it's been so effective. But moving on to the next question. Let's see. Are there particular species that have benefited more or less from the ESA? Why or why not?
Well, I can think of your backyard. Was it the Oregon chub is a fantastic success story. I mean, I think there's several videos online that viewers can go check out for themselves on the Oregon chub and how the watersheds of it's the Willamette River Basin and the extended riparian habitat there has recovered in many areas, and even so far as the local farmers and also their ability to manage those habitats along the rivers and make sure that there are still extended habitat for the species. And it's a spectacular, maybe that's a strong word, but it's a very hopeful sign that such species can rebound in such a quick and profound way as the Oregon chub has. So I would say that that's definitely one. I'm thinking also of other species. They're talking about introduction of the northern sea otter in the area, and also, you think about the bald eagle. I mean, even in my neck of the woods here in southern New Jersey, I grew up in the marshes of southern New Jersey in the 70s, which was the very nadir of for raptors in the United States, thanks to DDT. And I never saw a single bald eagle ever in the marshes when I was there. You were lucky to see an osprey or a blue heron, but now, I mean, the osprey population has exploded. You can't even find a single roost that's vacant out on some of these salt marshes now, which is a really wonderful sign. They're starting to nest over the signs and overpasses on the Garden State Parkway now. They're so plentiful. Same can be said in some areas of the bald eagle itself. I mean, it's a rare day that I'm out in the New Jersey Pine Barrens that I don't see at least one wheeling overhead. And it's not the most salubrious habitat for them because it is a rather nutrient poor habitat for a large raptor. I don't think they can get more than one hatchling in a single clutch in any given year in the Pine Barrens, actually. It's so hard scrabble, but even there they thrive. So that too is a hopeful sign.
Thanks, Alan. And actually, the Oregon chub was the first fish species to come off the Endangered Species Act and right in Oregon. So that's really exciting. Let's see.
To note that every species that is on the list has a devotion of community members behind it that cared enough to get it listed in the first place. So I really honor the power of local communities to protect a species and to get it listed and to make sure that the political pressure is there to have it be on the list itself.
Great point, Terry. Thank you. All right, moving on to the next question. They're piling up, so I want to get through them. Do you have any advice for convincing people to care about species like snails or snakes or other animals and plants like that? Maybe not the megafauna that we think about, but some of the other ones too.
Well, I can take that one because here in southern New Jersey, that tends to be what's here. We have carnivorous plants. We have a lot of herps like timber rattlesnakes. I'm on the venomous snake response team here in New Jersey. New Jersey Fish and Wildlife has a program where they have a hotline where they have volunteers that will come out to take timber rattlesnakes out of people's backyards and move them back into the woods gently or in campgrounds just to keep contact between humans and rattlesnakes to a minimum. There's an awful lot of snakes and turtles. There's an awful lot of wonderful people in this area that do a lot of volunteer work with diamondback terrapins. Their numbers are increasing. And there's a lot of middle-aged idiots like myself that are willing to run into traffic to get terrapins like red belly turtles and painted turtles and box turtles to get them out of harm's way and get them across the road during May and June. In fact, there are areas in the deep pine barrens where my gut just gets into a knot around May and June because I know that I'm going to have to scramble sometime during that day to get an animal out of the road, especially if there's a thunderstorm. So there's a lot of very committed people. We're hemmed in at all sides by sprawl, but the good news is that there's an awful lot of very committed volunteers here in southern New Jersey that do help out with these small animals. But to get more to your question, Allie, I find that if people come out with their kids, and kids are close to the ground, and there's all kinds of wonderful things here. I call it inches of grandeur because there's wonderful lichens, there's wonderful flowering plants, and there's all sorts of insects and creatures that you don't really find elsewhere in this region, but the New Jersey Pine Barrens. And the way that you get to people's hearts is through the wonder of their kids. And if the kids are really excited by it, the parents tend to follow suit. I've seen it over and over again. These programs like Pinelands Preservation Alliance does a wonderful job. New Jersey Conservation Foundation has been doing a wonderful job of acquiring lands that are set aside for conservation. I been volunteering at both of these places, and I've seen their programs work towards these goals, and it's really something to see, and it does give you hope. But I'm sure Terry has her own experiences as well. So
I love your examples, Alan, because it's who you are. And if you look at the book, so many of the species, I think there's 80 species that Alan has selected, and not all of them are charismatic species, as has been brought up. One thing I would just offer is there's a wonderful book called Bloodlines. I think that's what it's called, by Eli Nixon. And it's an advocacy manual, really. It's a beautiful book that they have illustrated about horseshoe crabs and red knots. And it's a wonderful example of how we can ignite people's interest in other species besides grizzly bears and wolves. So it's Eli Nixon's Blood Tides. And it's a wonderful book that they have put together, and I highly recommend it. They're advocating for a holiday to honor horseshoe crabs for their bloodletting in the vaccines that saved our lives during the pandemic.
yeah. We're going to have to get you to Cape May, Terry.
I know.
Yeah, that's my backyard. I grew up with both of those species, and it'll be a real joy to share them with you.
I can't wait. We don't have a lot of horseshoe crabs in the desert, I must say.
No, but I just love them to death. I think they're fantastic.
But we do have brine shrimp, you know. What other
Yes.
questions do you have, Allie?
Okay, so next question is, how many Oregon species are featured in the book? And maybe, Alan, if you could talk a little bit about them too, that would be awesome.
I actually made a list. I got them. I got them dog-eared right here. There's a whole batch of them here, so I can read them off. You got the gray wolf, of course. You got the northern spotted owl. Here, I can show you that one. Hang on. Here's trying to keep my place here. There's the northern spotted owl in its full glory. Let's see, we have the stellar sea lion, of course, the northern sea otter. Here's the other little beauty right there, as you can see. Of course, we're getting into more rare ones here. The orca, of course. We have the gray whale, and of course the peregrine falcon, which, yeah, that was quite a challenge doing the underside of the wing. I actually really enjoyed that, and the Oregon spotted frog, which is near and dear to my heart because I have a real soft spot for reptiles and amphibians, and I just love these guys. I think they're absolutely beautiful. And they've done a wonderful job with their conservation in Oregon as well. I've been reading up on that, and they've been doing a fantastic work. And the Oregon chub, I tried my best to get that iridescent quality that they have in their scales. I'm not always successful. But let me see here. Oh, yeah, I'll show you the gray wolf. I'm sorry. Yeah, and there's a gray wolf right there. Yeah. So there's quite a few of them in there. I would say there's at least 10 to a dozen that are specific to the Northwest, if not more. And that doesn't include the saltwater species and others. I think we also have I think there's some steelhead in here as well. I'd have to thumb through that, but yeah, you get the idea. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of them in there. But yeah, steelhead trout is in there as well. That is, but of course, I've had the pleasure of being in the Northwest a few times, and the place reduces me to tears every time. It's just so beautiful there, and not just for the fauna, but also the plant life and the fungi, which are just out of this world. The Hoh River Valley up in the Northwest just humbles me beyond belief every time. Has anybody else been to the Hoh? I assume I'm not the only one. No? Okay. All right. I'll shut up now.
So Alan, I have another question for you.
Okay.
Terry shared her story about the prairie dogs. I'm wondering if there was one incident or point in time where you really made a decision that you cared a lot about this type of stuff and conservation and species. Any story that you want to share about that?
Oh, I guess the one that really comes out is it has something to do with the dedication to the book. The book is dedicated, quote, for the lost meadows, as you can see. There was a meadow. I grew up on a bay, but I also had woods. I actually had a pretty decent childhood where I was. You had ocean, you had the back bay, you had the marshes, you had the forest, but you also had meadows. And this one particular meadow I was very fond of. I spent entire summers in it. I was really into butterflies and insects at the time. I was just a boy. But it was one of my favorite places in the world. And unfortunately, it got sold and turned, in one of life's bitter ironies, into a garden center. And it's the plot of land is still there, but of course the meadow's gone. But there were insects and flowering plants there that I'm not even entirely sure that I even dreamed them, because they were just so lovely, and I've never seen their like again. And there are some rarities in my part of the country, but I wonder if, in some ways, if I had hallucinated some of them, because I was just so over the moon in this place. But that was I remember walking through the garden center and just breaking down and crying years later, because I know what was lost, and I remember what was there, and I may be the last person to even know or care, and that still weighs heavily in my chest. But to be more close to the question at hand, there wasn't any one inciting incident for me, because I always was surrounded by living things. I had the privilege and the joy of having that right outside my door growing up. So right from the beginning, I had a very strong affinity to the living world. And I have a hard time looking at it with anything other than wonder and reverence even now. So I don't have any particular incident. It was just something that it got its hooks into me really deep when I was very young. And I don't remember if there was any particular species that really did that for me, but it goes so deep with me that it's hard for me to say. I don't know if that's a good answer or not, but that's the best I can
Thank
do.
you, Alan.
Yeah.
So next question I have is, are there any species that you wanted to include but didn't get the chance to? Since they do have to be contained to a book, you have to make some tough decisions.
Oh, that is a very good question. Oh, there's so many. I don't know where to begin. I mean, the problem with a book like this is that it can only be a survey. Unless somebody wants to pay me full time to do book after book after book like this, which I'm more than happy to entertain if anybody's out there. I would love to keep doing books like this until I drop dead at my desk if somebody's willing to, bankroll my expenses, But yeah, that's a tough one because there are species, like there are more than one kind of pinniped I would have liked to have had, or there would have been a lot more plants. I would have liked to have included more plants. I do have a Venus flytrap in the book because I think it's under consideration now for threatened or endangered species status because of the poaching activity in the Carolinas that are intensifying. I would have loved to have had some species here in the New Jersey Pine Barrens, like the bog asphodel, Narthecium americanum, or Pickering's Morning Glory. Actually, Pickering's Morning Glory did get into the book. It's in the half title page in the front of the book. There's only about a dozen established populations here in the New Jersey Pine Barrens, and they're all endemic to this region. I actually had the privilege of planting one of those populations myself personally. So I think I would like to have included more insects and more reptiles and amphibians, turtles and plants, but I realize that that's my personal preference. I love megafauna as much as anybody else, but I would love to have done a book. It would be an interesting book if it was just exclusively focused on invertebrates or another volume on plants. I would love to do more than one volume of a book in this mode. That would be a real joy. I would love to have the opportunity to do that. So I don't know if that's a good I don't know if that's a good answer or not, but
Yeah, I think plants definitely need some more attention, and invertebrates too.
yeah, I spend a lot of time with botanists. The nice thing about botanizing is that they tend to stay in one place. You can you don't have to get a tracker or anything like that on. But anyway.
Thanks, Alan. So next question I have, this person says, wow, look at the California condor. I agree. That's definitely a great one in there.
Yeah,
Were there
I
any
love them.
drawings the publishers liked more than others, or any you found harder to draw than others? I know you mentioned the peregrine falcon, but any of the other ones?
Yeah, well, the American alligator was kind of tough because the spread was such that it was very difficult to find a position that showed off its attributes in a way that I thought gave justice to the animal. And so I had to have the tail and the back kind of curving, and getting the plates in perspective was very difficult. And I think that took me about 3 weeks to do, actually. It doesn't look like it's that complicated an image, but rotating the animal itself and the structures and looking at reference photo upon reference photo, and not just that, but video. I've seen them myself personally, of course, but the thing is about a lot of these animals is that a lot of them, like the northern spotted owl, they employ patterns that dazzle the eye to such a degree that it's very hard for me to zero in on a pattern. And I have to do that in order to make it legible to the eyes of the viewers. And so I really had to sit there and really meditate and really figure out the line of attack on you know, how I was going to tackle any particular image. And sometimes just sitting there for hours, just kind of analyzing the photos and trying to figure out what the signature pattern that makes this animal distinct that needs to come to the fore. I've had this challenge in the past with the project with the Museum of Natural History, where there were so many fish that, you know, you had a Manhattan or a minnow or a hake, and you know, the trick is to hit the top of that bell curve where you have enough detail where it is distinct to that species, but you don't put too much detail in it where they all start to look alike. So that's always been a real challenge when you're trying to do a proper and faithful representation of any given species. That's always a real challenge. Did that answer the question? I'm sorry if that wasn't very helpful.
Oh, that was great. Thank you.
Okay, all right.
So I have another question. Are there any species included in the book that are no longer on the Endangered Species Act?
Yeah, the bald eagle and the American alligator and the Oregon chub, apparently. There are a few others. The Pine Barrens tree frog was on the list, but they found a disc chunk population in the Florida Panhandle. I think they're still deliberating over what to do about that, but I put it in the book anyway just because I just love the animal itself, because you know it's I consider them a you know, associates of a sort. You know, they're friends of mine, and you know, I wanted to do them justice. It's like a little bit of a tribute, actually. So sometimes I'm not entirely consistent in the animals that I chose, but my editor Maisie Cochran and I went through the list to make sure that most of the species in the book are cases where the Endangered Species Act was instrumental to their survival, if not outright saving them from extinction and seeing their numbers increase. So, and then there are other species in the book that are still teetering on the edge, but would surely have been lost had they not been listed. What is it? The Devil's Hole pupfish comes to mind. It's only found in one hot spring in Nevada. The hot spring is at a constant 91 degrees Fahrenheit, and the entire species lives and breeds and feeds on a small ledge of rock that is exactly 3 feet below the surface of the pool, and is found nowhere else on Earth. That it's like a 15 by 20 foot ledge, and that is the only place on the planet that it is found and that it can survive. So, you know, you have an awful lot of those species. You also have the Alabama cavefish, which is nearly transparent. And it's found in North Alabama in only one cave system. And their numbers fluctuate roughly around 100 individuals, and they are found nowhere else either. And I think there's also a blind salamander, a Texas blind salamander that lives nearly directly under, oh goodness, what's wrong? Austin, Texas. So whether or not that species is going to survive over the long term is anybody's guess, but you know, cross your fingers there. So there's an awful lot of wonderful species in the book that are still very much on the edge, that still need our advocacy. And I'm hoping, my dearest hope is that the book in some small way will call attention to the plight of some of these lesser known species, and hopefully we'll find advocates for those species.
Thanks, Alan.
Yeah.
Another question we have, this person hopes they didn't miss it, but is wondering if you did any artwork on the Pacific Fisher.
Oh, the Pacific Fisher? I regret that I didn't. I'm so sorry.
It'll have to be in
but
volume 2.
I would love to do a volume 2. I would love to keep doing these as long as I possibly can. If there are any organizations that would like an illustration dedicated to whatever particular species that they advocate, please get in contact with me. I'd be happy to if I can, if I'm able to donate that art. This book is not about me. This book is about the mission, and the mission is to educate and illuminate the situation and our role in that in the plight of these animals. So yeah, I'm sorry, I'll just leave it at that.
Yep. Okay, I have, let's see, I think we have time for 3 more questions, 2 or 3. And I can jump on this one as well too. But this question is, the mountain pika appears to be threatened by global warming. How can the ESA protect this mammal if it were to be listed?
I think that's more in your wheelhouse, Terry.
Yeah.
Yeah, high desert. Yeah.
The peak,
Yeah, so
the pika.
yeah.
There's a wonderful book that was just written by Sarah San Antoine on the pika, and it's called Frontline. I'll find this out. Anyway, I think it's always about habitat, you know, and in the case of the pika, it's about climate and temperatures. And I can't actually give a precise answer on how we protect that particular species because it is so tied to elevation and climate. This is where I think the endangered species becomes even more powerful because of the nuances that climate is creating. Just as we know that our alpine species, such as the whitebark pine, is now endangered because of climate. Pine bark beetles are proliferating because of climate, warmer temperatures, and that's all in the same kind of ecosystem story of the pika. So it's a great question. I'm sorry that I can't be more precise. And I will talk to my friend who's a biologist studying the pika at Colorado Mesa College and get back to you. Allie, I will find the answer in
That's
a
good.
nuanced, scientific way, and you can tell the person who asked it what we might do.
Yep, definitely. I know one thing that could help is just funding and resources that you would get through the Endangered Species Act, and particularly for this species and a lot of species that are impacted by climate change, it's really important to have habitat connectivity so that if there's wildfires or it gets too hot or too cold, species have places there where they can move into habitats that are available for them that are suitable. So that's something that could help through the Endangered Species Act.
The book that I couldn't remember the exact title, it's called Front Country, and it's by Sarah St. Antoine, Antoine. It's a wonderful book, and it's for young readers, but it's also for adults, and it features the pika in all its natural history, and it's a great story for our young readers as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
Has
Okay.
anyone ever done a book on Joe Gale Howard, who single-handedly brought back the black-footed ferret from extinction? I don't know if anyone has. We had the pleasure of meeting Joe Gale years ago when we were doing work for the Smithsonian. And unfortunately, we lost her a couple years after that. But I would the book does call attention to her role on that page. For the black-footed ferret, we give tribute to Joe Gale for her efforts. Just wanted to call that out since we're talking about high desert mammals.
And I want to say, since we talk about people that we want to honor and pay tribute to, I think both Alan and I really want to pay tribute to Craig Poplarz, who without his vision, this book really wouldn't have happened.
And that is true.
Notice that he is with us tonight. And Craig, we want to tell you how much we love you. I certainly wouldn't have been involved in the ways that you allowed me to be and to have found a new friend with Allen. And so we're just so grateful to you.
Yeah, this book wouldn't have happened without Craig. You're absolutely right.
And I think it speaks to the power of community. I know Oregon Wild wouldn't be as powerful as it is, and as beautiful role model for those of us around the American West in particular, and the country in general. You're such a beautiful example, I think, of why community matters to wildlands and wildlives. And it's really a tribute and an honor to be able to be with you as a community tonight.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Terry. Okay, I think we can sneak in 2 more questions. So, the first one is, what are you currently working on? Terry and Alan, if you have anything to say on that, and then I can wrap it up with the final question.
I can do that
Go
quickly.
right ahead, Terry. I'm sorry.
With you, Alan.
No,
I'm
go right ahead.
working on another collaboration with a photographer named Fuzzle Shake on Great Salt Lake. Great Salt Lake has been at its historic low, and is a terminal lake and in danger of disappearing completely. And that will be out in the spring. And personally, I'm working on a book called The Glorians, that has to do with a dream.
As for me, I'm back in the trenches. I'm out with the state park rangers, building barricades and maintaining trails, that sort of thing. So I'm back to being a grunt, and also making sure that word gets out about the book, and hoping that people take it to heart. With any luck, I'll get the opportunity to do more books in the future, and that's my dearest hope. I've been an illustrator for 30 years, so I'm hoping that I get maybe another decade out of it. So it's anybody's game. I mean, it depends on who calls for me. I mean, I've been a freelancer for a long time, so it's just a matter of who knocks on my door. But in the meantime, there's work to be done here. So we're doing it. We just prevented a developer outside of town from developing 800 acres of forest here in central New Jersey, with the hopes that local conservation groups can scare up enough money to bid on that land and preserve it and adjoin it with existing state lands. So that work continues, and not to call attention to my role in it, because I'm merely a minor player here. I just basically follow orders from people who really are far more committed than I'm able to be. So I just lend myself, my hands and my head to whatever it is that's needed to be done. So that's basically what's going on here.
Awesome. Thank you both. Okay, one last question. Any last words of hope to leave our audience before I close out the Zoom webinar tonight?
Don't be worried if you lose hope. It's okay. The idea of losing hope is you allow yourself to feel those feelings and know that this is a cycle and that you will rebound. It helps, at least it helps me. I tend to think of the self as a pattern rather than something like an artifact or something like a stone. I think of myself more as a river, and knowing that helps me rebound and allows it lends more resilience to my psyche, and knowing that I'm not the center of the story, that I'm an incidental feature of the story, and that I have to make my contributions, regardless of my feelings. But allow yourself to lose hope, but know that in time you'll regain it if you just hang on for long enough.
Love that. I would add to Alan's sense of hope, that there's something deeper than hope. And I think that is engagement, and how each of us in our own ways with the gifts that are ours can contribute to that mosaic of engagement. And the last thing I would say is, we had a class at the Harvard Divinity School named after this book in honor of Allen, A Wild Promise, and he came and spoke to us. And it was so moving for our students to see what he has done with his talents. And I do think it's spiritual. And there was a gentleman named Lowell Bayer. He's an attorney. He is probably one of the most learned scholars on the Endangered Species Act. And I would encourage you to look at his work. It's Lowell Bayer, Bayer. And he came and talked to our class and gave our class a challenge. And what he said was, I've spent my entire life, and he's in his late 80s, studying the Endangered Species Act, writing about it, supporting it, defending it. Politics has divided us. Science has not moved us, though both are critical. He said, my challenge for you is to find ways that the endangered species can be lifted up in the name of spirit, in the name of spirituality. And how might we think about the Endangered Species Act as a spiritual act, as an act of love? And I think so often as conservationists, we are timid to talk about issues of the heart and emotion. And I think of the great conservationist, Marty Murie, who said before a Senate and House committee meeting on wild Alaska, gentlemen, I come to you as an emotional woman, and I ask you, what's wrong with emotion?
I agree.
Thank you, Terry and Alan. Yes, well, we are out of time, but thank you so much to our audience for listening in today. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and feel free to buy a copy of this amazing book, although we will be raffling off 2 copies. So make sure to get your tickets for that too if you're interested. And thank you again so much to Alan and Terry for your time tonight. I know it's late over in your time zone, so we appreciate you both being here.
Well, thank you very much. It's been an honor. Thank you.
Thank you both so much.
And it's an act of love, this Endangered Species Act. Love to all of you.
Thank you so much. Have a great night, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.